Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is sponsored by Prevail and by Simple Helix. Prevail makes encryption usable for everyday business by providing encrypted email that works with existing applications like Outlook and Gmail, and provides encrypted file sharing that's as simple to use as Dropbox, but with far better security. Simple Helix is a Tier 3 data center facility that provides businesses with internet services, data center services, cloud services, and managed IT services. Thank you to both Prevail and Simple Helix. Well, CMMC, it's just 4 letters, and while they may not evoke terror, they certainly evoke a lot of concern and confusion. The publication of the new Interim Dfars rule last month, which goes into effect the end of November, enables the DoD's planned gradual rollout of CMMC through the inclusion of CMMC requirements in RFIs and RFPs. The interim rule also requires organizations that exchange CUI to report a score for NIST 800-171 compliance to the government before their next contract award or renewal. And articles and blogs posted just today warn contractors and subcontractors of potential liability under the False Claims Act. And that's a stick the government has used before. Multiple CMMC levels, each with multiple practices and processes, and certification at the appropriate level must be included on a government contract. It can be a bit overwhelming and to some a bit scary. But today we're here to explain why it doesn't need to be confusing or scary, and that you don't need to feel trapped. You do have choices. Well, my name is Stuart Itkin, and I'm CEO of Security Advisors, an independent management consultancy that helps organizations address strategic and operational cybersecurity and business issues. I was formerly Vice President of Products and Marketing at ExoStar and Global Chief Marketing Officer at the Corporate Executive Board, which is now a part of Gartner Group. Joining me today are Sanjeev Verma and Scott McDaniel. Sanjeev is co-founder and chairman of Prevail. Sanjeev is a technology entrepreneur with a track record of building successful businesses. In 2000, he co-founded Irvana, which developed mobile wireless infrastructure used by leading mobile operators such as Verizon and Sprint to deliver high-speed 3G data services, and grew to the world's second largest supplier of CDMA 3G mobile data infrastructure. Sanjeev has held various technical and business leadership roles in Motorola's Internet and Networking Group. He is a member of the board of directors of Citizen School, an education nonprofit. He's earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Delhi College of Engineering, a Master's in Electrical Engineering from University of Rhode Island, and an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Sanjeev, welcome this afternoon. Scott McDaniel, also joining us, serves as the Vice President of Technology at Simple Helix. Scott has spent his entire career in information technology and brings significant value to IT managed services and governance and compliance programs around ISO 27001 and NIST 800. Additionally, he has built successful IT teams to support rapidly growing businesses. With more than 20 years of experience in engineering and IT and more than 15 years of experience in management, Scott holds a bachelor's in electrical engineering and a master's in business administration from Auburn University. Scott, welcome. Well, today we're going to specifically talk about common CMMC compliance fears and how protecting CUI can be ghoulishly simple with Prevail. You're welcome to submit questions through the viewer, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of the webinar. So Scott, let me start with you by asking a question. What is it about CMMC that makes it scary, and why shouldn't we be scared?
Yeah, so one of the things that definitely is a game changer for CMMC is this concept that for the first time, there is this third-party auditor, the C3PO, that will be showing up to your business and doing a formal assessment. And so that definitely brings some fear to the equation. And then as we work with our customers, there's really 4 questions that, come up as fears on a regular basis. So the first question that we hear a lot is, well, I'm nervous and I'm scared that I won't pass my audit. And even to that extent, it kind of moves into like, I don't even know the process of which it is that I have to walk through, to prepare my business to, pass that audit successfully. The other questions, and we'll kind of come back and talk about each of these, but we'll also hear is, I think this is a costly or, this could be an expensive endeavor to go do. We also hear quite often, I just don't have time. I think this is going to take a ton of time to go do. And, we're focused on growing our business. And then the last part is, okay, well, if I got through those 3 things, then well, what happens after the audit? How do I make sure that I can do this again? And depending on the CMMC level, which of the, the frequency of which you have to do it. So how do I maintain this thing after I got it up and running? So going back to the first one, nervousness about the audit and passing an audit. What we like to talk about at Simple Helix is, you really need to approach this by what we call walking through the front door. And so what I mean by that is that there's 4 steps, in our opinion, to get to that passing of an audit. Those 4 steps would be doing a baseline. So if you had already done some work with Dfars, but even if you hadn't done any work with Dfars, you probably already have some things in place that are working towards your overall compliance. I.e., if you're using O365 or Gmail, you probably already have some spam filtering in place, some things like that. So the first step in that baselining is getting through a gap assessment, getting somebody to come in and just review what it is that you got. Then that leads to, building a POAM or a project plan that has the milestones in it, and thus getting you prepared to move to the second step, which would be implementation. So implementation is where, hey, we know we have these things that we know need to go fix. We need to go lock down firewalls. We need to get email encryption turned on. We need to do some of these activities. Implementation, we're working through that. And so the third step being, once the implementation is done, we move into operating and living by this new compliance model that we put in place. You want to live and operate it for 2 to 3 months before you have an assessor show up, because there will be things that you learned through the implementation process that, hey, we wanted to put this policy and procedure in place, but once we actually start practicing it, there's something about it we don't like. So you might want to tweak that stuff, but you want to get through all that tweaking and, making sure that all your employees are trained and all that stuff is done before the audit, which gets you to the 4th step of the actual assessment itself. And so working with preparing for that assessor to show up, making sure that you have all your policies and procedures ready. You've done maybe like an internal audit yourself to make sure you're doing what you say and you say what you do kind of stuff. And really, as you work through those 4 steps, making sure that you leverage the help that we can bring to that to make sure that you get through the process and you get sufficiently prepared so that you actually really do pass that audit.
Scott, let me ask you a question. You've said that organizations, already have a lot of this in place, and most of the organizations that are going to be subject, at least to CMMC level 3, have likely taken steps with respect to NIST 800-171. And with respect to the companies that you work with, how far along are most of those with respect to 800-171 as kind of that stepping stone towards CMMC?
Yeah, so for us at Simple Helix, we do come in as that outsourced IT group, and we do implementation. And so what we see most of the time with the small and medium-sized businesses is that they have some sort of a draft of an SSP. They absolutely took and resolved some of the easier controls to address. But when it got to either controls that were more expensive to actually have to go implement, or they were more complicated to go implement, those never actually got done. And so we always see that, there was some progress towards the Dfars, but very rarely do we come across somebody that, truly just, has hit a home run with it and, just have all 110 controls already addressed. And so that's the reason why we like having a gap assessment in there, because, if you've already done some work, then we don't need to go rework that. We should totally leverage that effort and continue the movement forward such that we do get eventually all the controls covered. So then moving on to the next most frequently asked question is, well, what is this going to cost me? And, because there is this fear that this is a really expensive endeavor. And to some degree that is correct, but there is definitely not a one size fits all. And again, that's where that kind of that gap assessment I mentioned comes into play, because you probably already did some stuff. You probably already put some protections around some of your employees just because that's good business practice. And so we at Simple Helix, we tailor our packages so that, we're not replicating work and things of that nature. But then there's other things that we can do to control the cost of this so that it doesn't get out of hand. So a couple things that, we're always preaching is when you're trying to figure out what CMMC level, there's no need to overshoot to a higher level than what you really need for your business. So, we've seen customers show up and they go, man, I'm all in, I'm going CMMC level 5. Well, in reality, the business will dictate that maybe they need to be a CMMC level 3. And there's a whole lot of cost that comes with those higher levels that you won't necessarily maybe reap a benefit from. So if you can sufficiently match the level that you need to be compliant, you can control some of that cost by not overshooting. The next area that we also preach quite often is with the compliance program. You can go into it and say, I'm going to go figure this out by myself. And there's nothing that stops you from doing that. But leveraging some external help to get you through the process can get it done substantially faster. And so, like leveraging us at Simple Helix, we've configured many like Office 0365 environments. And of course, we work with Prevail. We know how these tools work. So we know a lot of the gotchas, and we've already got solution for those gotchas that you would otherwise have to learn on your own. So there's an efficiency gain by bringing in some external help just to get you through the process quicker.
And I would assume, Scott, that it's also, somebody like Simple Helix brings in a knowledge of alternative products or alternatives to be able to solve perhaps the same requirement for a customer, because the solution that may be appropriate for one may not necessarily fit for another.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we invest quite a bit of time making sure that we pick tools and solutions that don't have a lot of overlap. So I could talk about an example where we were working with a customer that already had a asset management tool and a remote desktop, and they just had that for their own, support of their desktop and laptop fleet. And so for us, one of their big complaints and the reason they came talk to us is that they started working with another MSP and said, well, you're going to have to rip that tool out. You got to put our tool in its place. For us, we know that the requirement is that there's an asset management tool. We don't necessarily care which tool it is, but we discovered that, hey, we don't have to go and rip and replace the solution they've already chosen. It changes us. We use a slightly different tool in their case, but instead of just using the one we would normally use, there would have been all sorts of overlap in terms of functionality. And hey, now there's going to be two tools that have asset management in them. And well, which is the right tool and which one's the accurate one? We help customers get through all those choices of tools and understand the features of those tools such that we minimize the overlap and paying double for when you only needed one. A couple other thoughts on with regards to the compliance cost is that at some point we know that every single person in the DIB will have to do CMMC. So we see customers show up and go, man, I don't want to do it because I don't think my competition's going to do it. And if I go do it, then I incur the cost of doing this, where that guy doesn't. So there could be a competitive advantage. And our argument to that is, well, at some point, everybody has to do it. This will be an equal playing field. And, Katie Arrington and the CMMC advisory boards are, out there preaching that the DoD understands that the cost in the contracts are going to have to go up to cover the cost of doing this. But that is totally okay, because what we're after is protecting, the intellectual property of the United States. And yes, there's a cost to do that, but we absolutely have to do this to protect ourselves. And so this idea that, well, I'm not going to do it because I think my competition is going to somehow get away without doing it, that's just a false premise, and that everybody will eventually have to do this. And so it will be an even playing field.
I guess there's also concern about meeting the deadlines as well, and being there in time either for your next award or whenever it may be required by a prime that you're working with.
So that kind of gets us into that next point of, well, yeah, how do I get compliant in time? So when this originally came out, there was the directive that you would have to go get your CMMC certification before you even bid on an RFP. And so you're kind of in this chicken and egg, because you're looking for the RFI. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not an RFI. And this idea that I have to go make the investment and put the time in to do this before you can even bid on the RFP was a little challenging. So in June of this year, the rule got changed where you can now bid on the RFP and you don't have to produce your CMMC certificate until the time of award. So now that begs the question, okay, so, well, how much time does that mean? And I know Sanjeev's going to talk into this, but, part of the value of us and Prevail working together is that we can reduce the amount of time it takes to get compliant with Prevail and our managed services, such that, we feel confident that we can get you compliant between the time of submitting an RFP and getting the actually awarded to you.
And Scott, I know the new Dfars interim rule has a scoring and reporting requirement. Has that had an impact on people how are responding and how they're looking at the timeline?
Absolutely. And so we have seen a trend where prior to the interim rule that, I kind of started this conversation with, we often see people, kind of started a Dfars compliance effort, but at some point you can tell that it kind of lost momentum and never got finished. What we're seeing with the interim rule is, oh my goodness, I need to go back and finish that Dfars compliance that never quite got done. And then as we came through August and September and, kind of going through the new fiscal year, another thing that we've seen at Simple Helix is the idea that, a lot more people came also asking about ITAR compliance as well. And so for us, we're saying, okay, Dfars with the interim rule has some new renewed life in it. You can't take that thought process of, I'm just going to not finish the Dfars effort. I'm just going to go clean in the CMMC. You also got this ITAR resurgence that's also happened. And so what we're looking at is maybe like a triple play option where, okay, let's go build a compliance program that does the Dfars, the CMMC, and the ITAR, because all three of them are going to be alive and well for the next several years. And then, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know a difference with CMMC from 800-171 is the notion that environments change, an IT environment evolves over time, the threat environment changes. So, unlike 800-171, which was kind of a snapshot in time, CMMC has some continuous monitoring requirements to not only see that you're compliant on the day that you go through and achieve a certification, but you continue to stay compliant as your environment and as the threat environment changes.
Yeah, and so I would say that, like, for my team, sometimes the controls or the practices, as they're called in CMMC, even then they still feel a little dated at times, right? So, like if we talk like desktop imaging, for example, Dfars said, I got to control the image, right? The Windows installation on a laptop, and there's got to be this, lockdown image that gets used. And, there's more modern ways. And so things like we do at Simple Helix is leveraging functionality that comes with the Microsoft Office 365, such that instead of, hey, I'm doing this one-time thing with a image on a desktop, no, I join the laptop to the O365 environment and I control the fleet of desktops and laptops via policies, such that if a device did somehow get altered, the next time the employee logs in, the policy gets reapplied and it gets fixed actively. And as the rules change and we have to either modify an existing policy or, hey, we've introduced a new policy, again, we can proactively go push that to the fleet, as opposed to maybe kind of that traditional model of, oh, we'll bring everybody's laptop back, re-image it, and redeploy. And so, yeah, there's quite a bit of activity like that. And again, these are things that we see at scale and say, okay, well, you might have learned this, you might have to learn this the hard way, but we've already been there, we've already done it. We found a proactive way of addressing it and basically kind of future-proofing you, because we all don't know necessarily how CMMC will change as we go forward. We just know enough that the rules will change and we got to be able to push and update as needed.
And that should really, help make maintaining compliance far less scary than people think it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And and then even from that perspective, like when you kind of go down that path and you're using the cloud services, some of the fringe benefits that we've seen, especially here with COVID coming into the equation, is the idea that hey, I can't necessarily swing by your office, pick up a laptop to work on it. All right, everybody's working at home. And from that perspective, with, like using Prevail, we assign an account, the individual can go self-serve, get that installed. And then, even from our perspective, we can order a laptop, have it shipped directly to your house. when you sign in to your O365 for the first time, your device gets enrolled, the policies get applied to it. And now there isn't this old labor intensive way. It was, we've streamlined so much of it, and we become faster, and again, we can continue managing it going forward.
Right. I'd like to bring Sanjeev into the discussion here. I know that one of the requirements that's woven throughout CMMC is encryption, and it's the one that people say is really scary, and perhaps because at the heart of the term is crypt. So excuse the Halloween reference, but Sanjeev, how has Prevail taken the crypt out of encryption and kind of made encryption less scary?
Well, thank you, Scott, and thanks for the question, Stuart. So I think I would like to start off by further scaring you, and then hopefully I walk you off the cliff. So with your permission, I'd like to answer this by sharing my screen and sharing a few slides that describe how this thing is simplified. So you are right that at the end of the day, CMMC is all about, ensuring that your communication and collaboration is secure. That's the whole point of the exercise, so that the adversary can't access your electronic communication, they can't access your files and so forth. And encryption certainly plays a key role in protecting that. So first, let me scare you a little bit. So CMMC asks you to take a lot of steps to go and make yourself secure. So as many of you are familiar, there are 17 domains that a business has to take care of, starting with access control, asset management, situational awareness, security assessments. And I gotta say that for most of the folks that are listening to this and are contemplating CMMC, rightfully their heads gotta go spin. I mean, they got into business to build tools or chemicals or software for the defense establishment, and these controls, which then these domains which match to 100+ controls, are downright scary. So the question on the minds of most is, what do these mean? I mean, it looks like a soup of alphabets and mumbo jumbo. How am I going to go deal with this thing? And back to the questions of is it hard, scary, expensive, and so forth. So that was the scary part. So as in most things, we like to simplify. And when you look at these 17 domains, what they essentially boil down to are two things. First and foremost, you need a system, a tool, a platform, whatever you will call it, that helps you to store and share controlled and classified information more securely than you're used to with your old 365 and G Suite and so forth. So that's the first thing that you need. And if you get the right tool, then as you will see, the boxes in green become compliant if you pick the right tool to store and share your CUI. The second thing that you need to do is to write policies and procedures that tell you how to use the tools properly and implement proper cyber hygiene. And so some of those policies and procedures work in conjunction with the tool. So for example, you see over here 3 boxes in yellow. That basically means you chose the right tool and you wrote the right policies and procedures, and the combination of the two allows you to become compliant. And then the boxes in blue represent mostly policies and procedures. So when you whittle down, how am I going to become CMMC compliant? It basically boils down to 2 things. Number one, you choose an appropriate tool or a system to store and share CUI. And secondly, you write appropriate policies and procedures. One gotcha over here is that you'll say, well, I store and share CUI using G Suite and O365. And the unfortunate truth is, and the fact is that under CMMC, both of those are non-compliant. So you've got to make a choice of picking a tool to go against store and share CUI, and then pick a partner such as Simple Helix, who is there in their consulting capacities, both as an implementer, but also as a specialist well-versed in cybersecurity practices that helps you write these policies and procedures. And so it's a combination of those policies and procedures plus the tool that gets you to the CMMC promised land. So your question was on encryption and the role that it has to play. Well, encryption has a key role to play in the use of the new tools to store and share controlled and classified information, because in existing systems, the reason O365 and G Suite aren't compliant is that while they use encryption in some form, specifically encryption in transit and at rest, that's not adequate for a state level adversary, which is what the DoD is trying to protect itself at. So then it brings us to, your question was, what does Prevail have to say about that? Well, when it comes to the choice of systems to achieve level 3 compliance, there are basically two leading choices. So as I mentioned again, you can't use O365 and G Suite in native form. And so the two leading choices are, number one, a tool called Microsoft GCC High. And this is a very capable tool. It comes from Microsoft. And then the second tool is one that we provide from Prevail, which is an end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing system to store and share CUI. The third option, obviously, that exists is if you have an on-premise, system, then you got to take all the controls and all the processes to become compliant. So what are the differences between GCC High and Prevail? Well, again, GCC may be a very capable tool for an enterprise, but it is an extraordinarily expensive, tool. And the reason it's expensive is that it asks you to remove your O365 or G Suite, rip it out, and replace it with GCC. And this process of ripping and replacing usually takes about 4 months or 5 months of planning to do so. And then once you've ripped out your existing infrastructure, then you must deploy a much more expensive license to all users. As opposed to that, Prevail comes up with an overlay strategy. It basically says, use your O365 and G Suite just the way you do today to communicate non-CUI, and just overlay Prevail onto it. The deployment, instead of taking 5 months, takes a day, and you deploy only to the users that handle CUI. So the combination of this leads to a system that has radically lower costs. So as people that are concerned with cost, we typically cost about 75% less. But the more important aspect over here is that while GCC certainly provides, enhanced security versus, O365, etc., versus state of the art, it's not there. And this is where I'll talk a little bit more about. The state of the art now is to assume that the attacker will get to any server, any user, and any admin. And so in that case, you use protection of what's called end-to-end encryption. Keep your information encrypted all the time. And that's what is the NSA's recommended, technology procedure. And we'll talk more about it. But that's what Prevail brings to the table as a choice for organizations seeking level 3 and higher compliance.
I think the point about GCC, it's an enterprise decision. Have you seen with clients that you worked with kind of what percentage of users actually handle CUI? I know there are a lot of organizations that have both commercial and government components of their business, but is there anything generally in terms of what percentage of users actually need to have that level of security?
Well, certainly the number is, it can vary by organization, but often it's, less than 50%. And why is that? In any organization of significant size, or even a modest, 20, 30, 50% organization, not everybody that works in the company is working on engineering or the core aspects of the program that require the user to be exposed to control unclassified information. And so that's one aspect. The second aspect is you may well be a company that has only part of your business with the Department of Defense. So you could be a 200-person organization, and we have many customers who have, for example, just 30% of the organization doing business with the DoD. And so generally speaking, even with DoD focused organizations, certainly, 60% thereabouts or less handle CUI. And in organizations that are doing mixed business, both with the DoD and commercially, that number can be as little as 20 to 30%.
So less of a cost impact and avoiding, as you put it, the rip and replace of needing to put in a new solution.
Yeah.
Good.
So I sense, Stuart, that the question behind most viewers, minds will be, well, you said that you keep O365 and G Suite, both of which you said are non-compliant. Then how am I going to be compliant? And perhaps it's useful to demonstrate that a little bit and provide users a perspective of why that is possible. So may I, with your permission, kind of show viewers how such a deployment takes place and how they can be compliant keeping O365 and G Suite.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, let me do this. So as we had mentioned, you are typically in an organization that is using, say, Outlook or G Suite. And so you're using O365, and we mentioned that O365 is a non-compliant system, and Microsoft will say, go rip it and replace it with GCC High. So here's a user Alice, and user Alice is in a company that requires to handle CUI. And Prevail says, hang on to your, O365, but sign up for a Prevail overlay. And you can sign up and deploy that in a matter of less than an hour for a typical, 100% organization. And what that does is, for this user Alice, this is a regular inbox where all of our emails are coming in from any user. They can be spam, phishing, spoofing, and so forth. But when you join Prevail with the same email address, it adds an encrypted inbox. And it is here that you get all of your CUI emails. You'll notice that the emails are accessed just as you're used to, but the banner will tell you that they are end-to-end encrypted, by which we mean they were encrypted by the sender and only can be decrypted by you, the recipient, and no one else can see it, not even Prevail. And sending an email, by the way, is also very simple. The system takes care of it automatically. So for example, if you're creating a new email, the system, if you were sending it to a user who doesn't handle CUI, the email would go through your regular O365. The whole premise is you deploy Prevail to the users that handle CUI, and say I was sending an email to somebody called Ed Murphy, who was even on a Google system. The moment I put Ed's email address, just like your iPhone recognizes another Apple user and sends a message in blue, Prevail automatically starts encrypting the message, and you can, send CUI, and as I will show you, even ITAR data, and that's basically it. So if you were sending it to somebody who is not needing CUI, the message goes over regular O365, but it automatically encrypts it for others, so you don't have to make a choice. And if you were a G Suite user, it's the same thing. Obviously, Google is non-compliant, but you will see within your Gmail browser a secure messages tab, and this is where the end-to-end encrypted message is showing up, which I just sent. And again, Google can't see this thing, neither can Prevail, etc. So that's the communication part of it. And then the final part of it is, how do you store files, etc. So that part is essentially what's called Prevail Drive. It comes with it. So it's like your OneDrive or Google Drive. You don't have to get rid of your OneDrive, but you'll see a folder system. And then you create, basically folders underneath. These folders, any information that you put in there is end-to-end encrypted. And as an example, you got a new Navy project, you got some new information, you simply drag and drop it in there. Here's the information, and it encrypts it, uploads it. You'll actually have access to it on your mobile devices. And if you want, you can share it with other users and set appropriate permissions. And I'm going to show you that. So here's, again, my mobile phone. And Here's the Prevail app over there. You got biometric authentication. So here are all your emails that were subject to CUI. And at the bottom, you'll notice this thing called Drive. So if you click on Drive, first and foremost, you'll see the same folders that you have on the computer. They're all synced, sorry. And you'll see the exact same versions over here. And if you want, and you have this new Navy project, you want to share it, you simply go and say share on the phone, and it brings up, you know, what email address and what permissions. If you want them to view only, you view only. And if you want to edit and share, you edit and share only. And these are the kinds of modern systems that you can use to go and store and share. So it makes it really, really simple. You email from the tools that you are used to, and you store and create your folders under the Drive system. And that's really how the system essentially allows you to keep using your O365 and Gmail, and allows you to be compliant at the same time. Because again, unlike O365 and Gmail, all information is encrypted all the time so that no one, not even Prevail, can look at it. And so therefore, neither can the attacker. If the attacker goes to the server, they get nothing but gibberish. If they compromise your admin, they get nothing. And even if they hack your O365 or Google password, the only information they'll get is your non-CUI information. They cannot access the CUI information because it is tied to an encryption key on your device, and therefore inaccessible to the adversaries. And that's why basically CMMC advocates the use of encryption and strong security for protecting CUI. Does that make sense?
It does. And how easy then is it to add somebody, so that if I have a new partner in my supply chain and I want to share CUI with them using Prevail, what needs to happen on their side, or what do I need to do to allow them to be able to receive information securely?
Yeah, very easy. It actually, any end-to-end encrypted system obviously needs encryption at both sides. But these systems are super easy. So let's say you add a new partner, you just go create an email, or you have a folder. And let's say, you know, it's a new partner at, you know, abc.com. And you'll see that normally the email will go unencrypted. But if you want, basically, for it to go encrypted, you simply turn the encryption switch on. The user will get an invite to join, and they can join for free in 2 minutes. In fact, the viewers over here can go and set up a free account. And from this point on, you can store and share files and send it to them. And that's how easy it is. That's all you need to do.
So good. Pretty simple to add, you know, then a partner that you're going to exchange information with.
Absolutely. And within your company, obviously, you'll deploy to the users that handle CUI. So you as an organization become compliant because the users that handle CUI have a compliant system for storage and sharing. Your partner, your IT partner, as an example, Simple Helix, would have worked with you on the policies and procedures, so that you have the right policies, the right procedures, and you've got the right tool. And again, that tool could be GCC High, if that's the route that you chose and if that's appropriate for your organization. Or you could have that same thing be done with Prevail. And it's a combination of those that gets you to, you know, if I may, the promised land of CMMC compliance.
I know some environments are more locked down, more secure than others, so that if a government contractor is sharing information with a government customer, perhaps somebody with a .mil address, the customer security and firewalls, you know, sometimes going to strip information. It's going to put some restrictions. You know, will there be an issue with a customer receiving a key to be able to read email or data sent with Prevail?
Generally speaking, no. You know, if you are a corporation, no matter how locked down you are, you know, you can receive the information, and there is a mode. And again, I don't want to go into a whole demo of it,
Right.
but there's a mode in the system where, let's say you are locked down environment and you are not allowed to do any download onto your computer. You know, you can simply go create an account on the mobile, And it's a really cool capability. You just point your mobile phone at your browser, and there's a very fun technology now called a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. It sets up an encrypted tunnel between your browser and the mobile phone, transfers the key, you can read your emails, got your files, do all of that stuff. And then as soon as you either click that close, or within a short period of time, 20 hours or so, the information just disappears. So, again, we can deal with that at the appropriate time. This is not a product pitch over here, but
Right.
those capabilities exist to ensure that.
I know a question that we've received here is, does Prevail know if an email contains CUI, or is that still the responsibility of the user to manage their information responsibly?
No, we're not that smart.
Right.
We do not know whether the email contains CUI or not. So the simple rule that you ought to follow is simply deploy Prevail if it's within your organization to any user you think potentially handles CUI, so that any email that goes from between that group gets automatically encrypted. And the user, again, that's part of the policies and procedures that you are trained to identify that there is CUI. If you're communicating with somebody new and sending information, you do have to have the vigilance to see, gee, am I sending CUI? In which case, you just turn the encryption button on, and then the new user will be able to go and detect that. Another cool capability that is available to make things even more locked down is this notion of a trusted community. So you can, as an administrator in your organization, determine that your organization's domain and those of your partners, suppliers, and certain email addresses can be deemed as trusted. So then when emails and files are shared, they're only between that trusted community. And if you try to exfiltrate information outside or send an email containing CUI outside, it will be blocked, because that's not allowed with the trusted community. So again, there are safeguards built into the system to do so. But unfortunately, we yet lack the omniscient visibility to actually tell you that what you're sending is CUI.
But that would be a good feature for the next release.
I think that we're waiting about 100 years for that. You never know.
I think it requires somebody to first break the code and have a clear answer to what is CUI.
Yeah. I think much smarter people than we are will have to work a long time for that to happen automatically. But again, there are proxies, as I say. You can just simply say, okay, with this person or this domain, I just communicate securely, and that's it.
Yeah, understood. Well, we've got a number of questions that have come in. I know that we've answered some of them already in the chat, but I'd like to see in the time that we've got about 10 minutes left that we can try to tackle some of these questions. And Scott, maybe this is for you. You said many primes face a huge challenge with their subcontractors, who are not level 3 compliant. This in itself is a huge burden. What is the path forward for these groups? So it sounds like perhaps asking, not only do I need to worry about myself, but what do I need to worry about with respect to others that I'm working with?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways you could look at that, right? So there's the viewpoint from a prime that needs to go work, and the prime is going to be engaging subcontractors. So if you are that prime, you're going to be actively looking for subcontractors that are CMMC compliant. Now, the nice thing about CMMC over the Dfars or the NIST 800-171 is this introduction of the different levels, right? So a prime might be required from the original contract to be a CMMC level 5. There is the opportunity for the prime to say that the sub only needs to be CMMC level 3, or maybe if it's a nuts and bolts supplier type thing and they're not actually getting technical drawings or things, that maybe they just need to be a CMMC level 1. So there is, from the viewpoint of the primes, there is absolutely them already starting to look for subcontractors that are already CMMC compliant, their risk view is, I don't want to get all the way down to the awarding of a contract to find out that one of my subs didn't actually get certified, and now I lose the whole prime contract because of that. And then from a sub viewpoint, looking back upstream, there is the, okay, I see that this thing is coming. I do see that I'm going to have to do something, but I may not necessarily know when or how, or what is the trigger that makes me say I got to go do this. And then even to that point, some primes have even come out and said, well, we may start creating enclaves for our subcontractors to work within. Other primes are saying, no, I'm expecting my subs to go do this all on their own. And so there's a lot of combinations that'll happen in between that. But there is the overarching theme that you will have to, regardless if you are a prime or a sub, you're going to have to do something. And from that perspective, that's kind of where like this, Prevail being used with the G Suite or the O365 becomes a nice solution, because you get the flexibility of doing it when you need to do it. You get the compliance that you need, and you can hit the timeline and work with however that's flowing down.
Very good.
Yeah. May I actually add to that, Stuart? I think just adding on to what Scott said, it's a great question. And in this case, I do have to say that, use of Prevail really shines over here. So if you're a prime contractor, your supply chain can work with your suppliers and share information through the system. But one of the benefits that comes is obviously you're sharing in a compliant manner. But let's say you've got 100 suppliers and 20 of them are not up to the mark on becoming compliant. Well, you'll need to get them compliant, and either you set up a special, system for them, or send them laptops, or again, the use of a Prevail is a rapid way for them to become compliant, because they can deploy it not just for communicating with you, but also within the organization to other folks that handle the CUI, and in conjunction with policies and procedures. It's the most rapid and by far the most inexpensive way for the supplier to become compliant. So that's again one of the ways in which primes tend to use Prevail for managing their supply chain communications and making suppliers compliant.
And so they're actually enabling their suppliers at least to address that set of the practices under CMMC, helping them get to that point.
Absolutely.
So somebody, there's a question, and I think this one, Sanjeev, for you, is there a DoD standard for encryption?
It's again a great question. So what the DoD says is that you should use encryption, and you should also use appropriate encryption algorithms. Again, in the alphabet soup, it's FIPS 140-2 encryption algorithms, and not sort of unverified, algorithms. And the government overall is making progress in this department by making things clear. So, for example, till very recently, if you were sending and sharing ITAR data, you could literally not do it in the cloud, or you had to create enormously complicated systems to store and share information in the cloud. But working with the National Security Agency, the State Department came up with new regulation. It's called Section 120.54, which is the law of the land right now, which now specifies that if you want, you can send and share ITAR data, provided the information is end-to-end encrypted. Again, encrypted on the device of the sender and only decrypted on the device of the recipient. Nowhere else, never on the server is the information decrypted. This is not encryption in transit, not encryption at rest. It is truly end-to-end encryption. So provided you are end-to-end encrypted and the provider of the cloud service has no ability to access your keys and to decrypt that information in the cloud, and you're using FIPS 140-2 and its successors, then you can use it to store and share ITAR data. And so that's sort of where things are progressing. And we hope that there's also reciprocity for that in CMMC as well. But while there isn't any specific guidance from them that says, oh, just use this particular vendor's encryption, there is very clear guidance in terms of what encryption algorithms should be used and what kind of techniques should be used. And I hope that the ITAR example shed light on that and was helpful to you.
Actually, I think the ITAR example is a really good one. And Scott, something you and I had talked about ahead of this is, CMMC isn't the only requirement that most of these organizations face. I mean, ITAR is common among a lot of organizations within the DIB. And you had some specific thoughts in terms of how organizations need to kind of look at compliance as a whole, not just one individual framework. And I think some information you might want to share there.
Yeah, so we see this quite regularly that, before CMMC, there was this singular approach to getting Dfars compliant, right? And so when it came to writing the SSP, you literally matched up your responses to the control numbers and you got to the end of it. And now you had this SSP that was strictly dedicated for the NIST 800-171. And now that there's this second compliance in there around CMMC, a lot of folks are going, oh my gosh, I feel like I got to go back and rerun all of the controls all over again. And now it's like, I got to maintain two SSPs. I got to maintain one for the Dfars and I got to maintain one for CMMC. And then you introduce ITAR and it's like, oh, now there's three of them. And so we try to say, you can look at this from a higher level. And as you build your approach to becoming compliant, if you got the mindset on day one, hey, our organization will eventually have to do multiple compliances, then you can set yourself up where you now know, like, hey, once I set the password policy for our organization, hey, this applies to all of these different compliance models. And now I have a corporate policy that I then go tag with the different standards. And if you approach it from that perspective from day one, then it becomes so much easier to maintain this year over year.
And Stuart, if I may also add, again, this is where, original question on encryption bears, spending just a minute on.
Sure.
Which is, there's a myriad of controls and so forth, but as technology has evolved, you can now clearly see that the NSA guidance, the State Department regulations, leading to the creation of a common framework, which is simple, which says, look, take the strongest stance on security, which is quite simple nowadays to implement, which is end-to-end encryption. And taking that stance gets rid of a lot of these controls because, again, information remains encrypted all the time. And you, with one fell swoop, use the same tool to be compliant with CMMC, the same tool to store and share ITAR information, and the same tool to store and share, Dfars. And that's where, again, modern technology and the role of encryption has seminal bearing on how an organization, particularly small to medium businesses, ought to be thinking about things as opposed to replicating and saying, I got to do one set of rules and then, oh, this didn't satisfy ITAR, so you try to bring another set of tools and processes for that, and then say, oh, gee, I need Dfars and try to do it again. And we simplify and say, look, it's a simple set of tools, common set of policies and procedures, and do it once and save yourself the brain damage.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think an important point. And I know that we're just at the top of the hour. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay. Sanjeev and Scott, I want to thank you both for your comments today. I think we certainly can conclude that CMMC is it's important, it's involved, and there really is an urgency for contractors and subcontractors to start now. But I think what we've also learned is by making the right choices, the right partner, the right tools, CMMC doesn't need to be quite as scary. So thank you all for joining us today.